Imagine this. You wake up to the smell of pine and warm summer air drifting through the open window. I was sitting at my tiny kitchen table, sipping my first coffee, staring out at the forest that spread like an endless green sea behind my little veterinary clinic. It was early, just after sunrise, and the world felt peaceful in that quiet way only summer mornings can bring. I was thinking about the appointments lined up for the day. 2 dogs for vaccination, an old cat with kidney failure, and a hedgehog someone found limping near the gas station. Normal, routine day. I closed my eyes for a second, listening to the birds, feeling the steam of the coffee on my face. Then I heard it, a faint scratching sound at the glass door that led to the back terrace. At first I thought it was the neighbor's ginger tomcat. He often came to beg for food. But when I turned my head, my heart jumped so hard I nearly spilled the coffee onto my lap. Standing there, framed by morning light, was her. The lynx. The same lynx I rescued last winter, when she nearly lost her front paw to a steel trap. I nursed her for weeks in the storage room behind the clinic, fed her raw meat from my own freezer, and when she was strong enough, I drove her deep into the forest and watched her disappear between the birches. But now she was here again. Her golden eyes locked onto mine with an intensity that made my chest tighten. She looked healthy, stronger than before, but it wasn't her that made me drop my coffee cup onto the floor. In her mouth, dangling like a stuffed toy, was a lynx cub. Tiny, with large dark ears flopping to the sides. Behind her, peeking out from the wooden terrace railing, was another cub, slightly bigger, chewing on the corner of my outdoor doormat with total focus. I froze. My mind went blank for a second. Then all at once, fear, wonder, joy, and confusion slammed into me. I stood up so quickly my chair screeched against the tile. The noise startled the lynx. She stepped back, but didn't run. Instead, she lowered her head, placed the cub onto the wooden floor of the terrace, and nudged it forward with her nose. The cub wobbled, its paws too big for its skinny legs, and let out a high-pitched mewl. Then, as if deciding it wanted a better view, it scrambled forward on unsteady feet and pressed its little nose against the glass. I couldn't help it. I laughed, a choked, unbelieving laugh that echoed through the empty kitchen. The cub blinked up at me with wide blue eyes. Then it did something that nearly made me fall to my knees. It lifted one paw and tapped at the glass. Once, twice, like it was knocking to come in. Without thinking, I stepped forward and slid the door open just enough to peek my head out. The smell of warm pine sap and wildflowers washed over me. The mother lynx's ears twitched, but she stayed perfectly still, staring at me. The cub, meanwhile, saw the gap and made its move. In an instant, it lunged forward, stumbled over its own paws, and tumbled into my bare foot. Its fur was softer than anything I'd ever felt. It let out a squeaky growl and sank its little teeth into my big toe. Not hard, but enough to make me yelp and jerk my foot away. I couldn't stop laughing then. The tiny predator clung to my foot for a moment before letting go and sitting back on its haunches, looking very pleased with itself. Its sibling, still outside, was now trying to climb up onto a plastic watering can, wobbling and falling onto its side with a dramatic flop. The mother lynx blinked slowly at me, her gaze heavy with something I couldn't name. Trust? Desperation? Gratitude? I didn't know. But in that moment, as I stood there with a lynx cub biting my toe and another one wrestling a watering can, I knew one thing for sure. Whatever plans I had for today, they were about to change completely. And deep down, under the laughter and shock, I felt something else. A quiet fear. Because if she brought them here, it meant something was wrong. But as the cub let out another playful squeak and tried to climb up my leg, all I could do was smile like an idiot and say softly, "Hey there, little warrior. Welcome home." I didn't know what to do first. My coffee sat forgotten on the table inside, getting cold, as I crouched on the warm wooden boards of the terrace, staring at the tiny lynx cub trying to climb up my bare leg with determined little grunts. Its sibling, meanwhile, was outside by the watering can, batting it with oversized paws like it was the greatest toy in the world. The metal can wobble dangerously before tipping over with a clang, making the cub jump straight into the air, back-arched, fur puffed up like a miniature porcupine. I chuckled under my breath. I glanced at their mother. She had settled down under the shade of the pine tree just beyond my terrace, her front paws stretched out, head resting on them. Her sides rose and fell slowly. She looked tired, really tired. The kind of tired that made something cold twist in my chest. The cub at my leg lost interest in trying to climb me and scurried off towards the metal bowls I kept outside for stray dogs that sometimes wandered past. It sniffed the empty water bowl, then put both front paws into it and sat down, looking extremely proud of itself. The bowl rocked under its weight, and the cub squeaked in confusion as it tipped sideways, dumping it out onto the boards with a thump. I laughed despite the knot of worry in my stomach. The second cub wandered over, curious, and together they began batting at the overturned bowl like two kittens fighting over a paper ball. I stood up and slowly walked inside to grab my phone. My hands trembled as I scrolled to find Noah's number. He was a forest ranger and one of the only people I trusted here. The call connected after 2 rings. "Hey, Noah," I said, keeping my voice low so as not to scare the lynx family. I need your advice." "What is it?" His voice was groggy, probably still half asleep. "Remember that lynx I rescued last winter? The one with the paw injury?" "Yeah, of course. Did something happen to her?" "She's here. On my terrace. With 2 cubs." There was a pause. Then, "Are you serious?" "Dead serious. They're tiny. Maybe 8 weeks old. They're making a mess of everything out here." I forced a small laugh. "One just fell into the dog's water bowl." He chuckled, but I heard the tension in his breath. "And the mother? How is she acting?" "That's why I'm calling. She's just lying there. Not hunting them, not watching them. Just lying in the shade, breathing heavy." Another pause. Longer this time. "Listen to me carefully," Noah said, his voice dropping into that serious tone I'd heard only a few times before. "If she's brought her cubs to you and she's acting like that, it means she can't take care of them right now. She might be sick, injured, or starving. That's the only reason a wild lynx would bring her cubs so close to humans." I swallowed hard, glancing at her again. Her ears twitched at a fly, but she didn't lift her head. "What do I do?" I whispered. "Don't feed her directly. Don't approach her. Watch her closely today. If she gets worse, or if she leaves and doesn't come back for the cubs, you need to call wildlife rescue immediately." My stomach turned at the thought of her leaving these 2 tiny clowns behind. As if to prove the point, one of them stuck its head into an old plastic bucket near the wall, trying to lick something at the bottom. Its entire little body wriggled with effort until it suddenly slipped forward, headfirst into the bucket. I cursed softly and dropped the phone onto the table. I rushed over just as the cub began squeaking in panic, back legs kicking wildly in the air. I grabbed the bucket and gently tipped it onto its side. The cub scrambled out, its fur sticking up in all directions, eyes wide with indignation. It glared at me, then shook itself off and immediately started batting at the bucket again like nothing had happened. I picked up my phone. "Sorry, Noah, crisis averted." He snorted. "Sounds like you've got your hands full." "Yeah," I said quietly, staring at the mother lynx in the shadows. "But I think it's about to get a whole lot more complicated. Let me know if anything changes," he said. "And watch yourself. A sick lynx is unpredictable." I hung up and stood there for a long moment, watching the cubs wrestle with the bucket, their little growls high-pitched and ridiculous. Then I looked back at their mother. Her eyes were closed now. Her sides moved with shallow, tired breaths. And under the summer sun, with the smell of pine and dry grass in the air, I felt a chill wash over me. Something was very, very wrong. I spent the next hour pacing back and forth between the clinic and the terrace, trying to figure out what to do. The cubs were a whirlwind of chaos. At one point, I heard a loud clatter from inside the clinic storage room. My heart jumped into my throat. I ran in to find both cubs somehow crammed into the metal cat carrier I kept by the back door. They had pushed their way in together, their oversized paws scrabbling at the metal grate, trying to turn around. One was sitting on the other's head, its little tail flicking madly as it squeaked in protest. The other cub growled back, pushing upward with its back legs, squashing its sibling further down. I burst out laughing despite everything. Carefully, I unlatched the cage door. The top cub immediately shot out like a spring, stumbling onto the floor and rolling onto its side in a dramatic flop. The second cub tumbled out after it, glaring at me with flattened ears before scampering off towards the examination table. Their mother didn't move from her place under the pine tree. She lifted her head once when the cubs squeaked particularly loud, then lowered it again with a long, tired blink. I stood there for a long moment, feeling completely helpless. I couldn't just leave them, but if I fed them, if I brought them into the clinic, if I treated the mother here. I risked them becoming too used to humans. Lynxes that grow up trusting people don't survive long in the wild. Hunters, cars, poison, all the dangers I couldn't protect them from if they lost their fear. My phone buzzed in my pocket, pulling me out of my thoughts. I glanced at the screen. Dr. Reese, my clinic director. I took a breath and answered. Morning, Dr. Reese. Morning, she said, her voice clipped and businesslike as always. I saw the security camera alerts from the clinic this morning. Care to explain why there's a lynx on the terrace? I closed my eyes, pinching the bridge of my nose. It's complicated. Make it uncomplicated, she snapped. Are you harboring wild animals at the clinic? No. I didn't bring them here. They came to me. The mother is the one I treated last winter. She brought her cubs. They're what? Causing absolute chaos, I sighed, watching as one of the cubs tried to climb up the scale stand, slipping and landing in the waste paper bin with a muffled squeak. This is a veterinary clinic, not a wildlife rehab center, Dr. Reese said sharply. You know the rules. We don't keep wild predators near the building. Liability, insurance, public image. Do I need to go on? No, ma'am. Get rid of them. Now. Call animal control if you have to. She hung up before I could answer. I stood there, phone still pressed to my ear, listening to the deadline. A crash behind me made me turn. One cub had knocked over an empty metal food dish. Its sibling pounced on the dish immediately, batting it around the floor with squeaky growls. I felt my chest tighten. Get rid of them. Like they were garbage. Disposable. I looked outside at the mother lynx, still lying in the same place, her sides moving with shallow breaths. My heart thudded painfully. I couldn't just call animal control. I couldn't do that to her. Not after everything she'd survived. I walked over to the window, staring out at the tree line beyond the clearing. Movement caught my eye. A dark truck, crawling slowly along the dirt track at the forest's edge. Binoculars glinted through the driver's window. Hunters. I felt sick. I glanced back at the cubs, wrestling under the table, then at their mother in the shadows. Get rid of them. Dr. Reese's words echoed in my head. I clenched my jaw. No, not like this. Whatever I decided next, it had to be fast. Because the hunters were here. I didn't sleep that night. I sat at the small kitchen table, staring out into the dark yard lit only by the moon. The cubs slept curled together on an old blanket I laid out near the back door. Their mother stayed just beyond the tree line, eyes glowing dimly whenever the porch light flickered on. The hunter's truck had circled the clearing twice before driving off, but I knew they'd be back at dawn. By 4 a.m, I had made my choice. I moved around the clinic quietly, packing what little raw meat I had left into a cooler box. I found an old towel and laid it in a large plastic dog crate. I didn't want to use it, but there was no way to carry both cubs safely without it. They were too curious, too fearless for their own good. When I opened the door, cool dawn air rushed in. The cubs stirred, blinking sleepy blue eyes at me. I crouched down and whispered, "Hey, little warriors. Time for an adventure." It wasn't easy getting them into the crate. One decided it was a game and kept batting at my shoelaces while the other tried to climb up my arm. Finally, after a lot of squeaks and gentle shoves, they were both inside, glaring at me with flattened ears. I carried the crate to my truck and slid it onto the passenger seat. The cubs immediately pressed their paws against the mesh door, peering around with wide eyes. Their mother watched from the trees. Her gaze followed me silently as I climbed into the driver's seat. My chest tightened painfully. I rolled down the window. "Come on, girl," I called softly. "Let's go." For a moment, I thought she wouldn't move. Then she stepped out of the shadows, her body thin under her summer coat, and padded silently after the truck as I drove slowly down the gravel path. The cubs were quiet at first, huddled together in the crate. But 10 minutes into the drive, curiosity took over. One of them stuck a paw out through the mesh and started batting at the window controls. The window rolled down halfway, letting in a gust of pine-scented air. The cub squeaked in delight and tried to push its whole leg out, only to get stuck at the elbow. "Hey!" I reached over quickly, rolling the window back up before it could escape. The cub pulled its paw back with an offended chirp and immediately turned its attention to the dashboard. Before I could react, it had managed to smack the windshield wiper button. The wipers screeched across the dry glass, making both cubs jump and squeal in shock. The crate rocked dangerously as they scrambled over each other, trying to hide at the back. I laughed despite the tension coiling in my stomach. Easy, little ones. It's just wipers. Beside them, their mother trotted through the trees, visible now and then between the trunks. She kept pace with the truck, her ears flicking forward, her eyes locked on the crate. The sight of her running like that, so tired yet determined, made my throat burn. We drove deeper into the forest. The dirt track narrowed to a path barely wide enough for my truck. Branches scraped along the sides with dry whispers. Birds were beginning to sing as the first light of dawn broke through the canopy. I was so focused on the road ahead that I nearly missed it. A flash of metal between the trees. I slammed on the brakes, heart hammering against my ribs. Ahead, parked half-hidden by bushes, was the hunter's truck. Two figures stood beside it, rifles slung over their shoulders, talking quietly. One of them pointed towards the track, towards me. My blood ran cold. The cubs squeaked at the sudden stop, pressing themselves against the back of the crate. I turned off the engine, holding my breath. The hunters hadn't seen me yet. I looked at the lynx mother through the window. She stood frozen under a pine, her eyes locked onto mine. We couldn't go back, and going forward meant driving straight into them. I clenched my jaw, feeling the sweat trickle down my spine despite the cool morning air. I had to think fast, because if they saw her, or the cubs, it would all be over. I reversed the truck slowly, praying the tires wouldn't crunch over a fallen branch loud enough to alert the hunters ahead. Sweat dripped down my neck despite the cool dawn air. The cubs huddled together in the crate, wide-eyed and silent now, sensing my tension. When I found a narrow turnoff, barely more than 2 ruts through knee-high grass, I took it without thinking. Branches scraped the sides of the truck as I drove deeper into the forest. After 100 yards, I stopped, cut the engine, and listened. Nothing but birdsong and the distant hum of early summer insects. I glanced into the trees. The mother lynx stood frozen beside a fallen log, her eyes locked onto mine. I opened the door and stepped out slowly, the damp grass soaking my boots. "Come on, girl," I whispered. "We need to hide for a bit." I carried the crate to a small clearing surrounded by thick brush. The sun was just cresting the treetops, casting gold light over everything. I set the crate down and opened the door. Immediately, one cub bolted out, tumbling over its own paws before skidding to a stop in the moss. The second cub emerged more cautiously, blinking at the sudden brightness. The mother appeared beside them a moment later, silent as a shadow. She sniffed each cub, then pressed her forehead against mine for a fleeting second. Her fur smelled of pine and earth. I sat down on an old tree stump, too tired to stand. The cubs wasted no time investigating me. One of them spotted my black rubber flip-flops, kicked off beside the stump. It pounced, grabbed one in its tiny jaws, and yanked it away with a victorious growl. "Hey," I laughed despite the knot in my chest. "Bring that back." The cub strutted off into the brush, dragging the flip-flop twice its size behind it. Its sibling immediately followed, leaping onto the strap and hanging there as the first cub kept walking, the two of them disappearing into the ferns in a chaos of squeaks and muffled thuds. The mother lynx sat down in front of me. Her golden eyes held mine for a long, silent moment. She blinked slowly, once, twice. A gesture of trust or goodbye, I couldn't tell. I swallowed hard against the sting in my throat. I reached into my bag and pulled out the last of the raw rabbit meat I'd brought from the clinic. I laid it on a flat rock a few feet away. "There's water down the slope," I said quietly, pointing to where I knew a small stream ran year-round. "Plenty of hares down there, too." She didn't move, just watched me with that steady, unreadable gaze. Finally, she stood, turned, and walked towards the meat. She sniffed it once before calling softly to her cubs. They came crashing back through the undergrowth, flip-flop forgotten, and pressed themselves against her legs, squeaking and chirping. I stood up, brushing dirt from my jeans. My chest felt heavy and light all at once. I knew I couldn't stay here long. If the hunters found my truck abandoned, they'd search the area. The lynx looked back at me one last time. Her eyes shone golden in the slanting sun. Then she turned and padded away into the trees, the cubs bouncing after her, tails curled high like question marks. I stood there long after they disappeared, listening to the quiet forest. My heart ached, but beneath it was something warmer. Peace, maybe, or acceptance. That evening, I drove home under a sky streaked with purple and gold. I cleaned up the clinic, fed the boarding cats and dogs, and collapsed into bed, exhausted to my bones. When dawn came again, I woke to silence. I walked to the front door, barefoot, the boards cool under my feet. And there, laid neatly on the welcome mat, was a single offering. A wild duck, its feathers still damp with morning dew. I sank to my knees, tears spilling down my cheeks before I could stop them, because I knew what it meant. Thank you. Goodbye.